How would you describe our current relationship with China? How do you view that?
I think the U.S. and China right now have a relationship that could be characterized by a cautious ceasefire between two countries that see each other as their primary adversary. I wouldn't call this détente, where they really have a constructive working relationship and are effectively managing the bigger risks. I wouldn't call it a hot war where we're really going at it, and and the chances and the likelihood of conflict is really high. But we're in that weird sort of purgatory where we know we don't like each other. These two governments, they're both doing things to each other that the other doesn't like, but they're also sort of stuck with each other. We are unbelievably interdependent. 600 billion plus in trade, thousands of American companies on the ground in China, China holding directly 750 billion in U.S. treasuries and another trillion indirectly. They need our dollar. We need each other's tech. We need their rare earths. And so we've trying to figure out how to keep things from going totally crazy while also doing things that the other is just totally unhappy with. So, and I think the Chinese have a very clear idea of where they're going, and the U.S. does not. We are in a major debate with ourselves about our identity, about our place in the world, and that's showing up in how we deal with China. So it's this sort of confusing mix that's very, very unsettled.
It's challenging when you have a partner like China that has not just a vision, but a willingness to enact that vision over such a long horizon. And like you said, we, in this country, it feels like we're not even on solid footing in a number of different regards.
Yeah. I don't want to give in too much to the idea that the Chinese have a 5,000-year plan and they're just sort of patiently seeing it through. They can also be very short-sighted and they make tons of mistakes. But broadly speaking, China under Xi Jinping knows exactly the direction that they want to head in, and we don't. China knows that it wants to be an economic superpower, a military superpower. It wants to do whatever it can domestically and internationally to make the world safe for the Chinese Communist Party. It wants to be able to run on rules that it thinks are fair and not have to come to the U.S. or anyone else for permission. And they want respect. The U.S. We thought we had a world that we liked after the Cold War, and then it hasn't gone as planned. Globalization hasn't gone as planned. Economically, in terms of immigration, technologically, we have huge debt. We have infrastructure problems. We are being faced with the onslaught of new technologies like AI and stuff in genomics and in so many places. And we're just struggling with figuring out how to find north and reset ourselves. And that's sets us up for real tensions or struggles in figuring out how to manage a relationship when we don't even know what we want. I mean, I know in my personal relationships that if I try and develop a friendship with somebody or a constructive relationship with an employer, and I don't even know what I want, that relationship usually doesn't go super well.
Yeah, it's hard to have a good relationship with somebody if you're confused in that regard, right?
Yeah, you're telling me.
Are we fundamentally in opposition to China's plan? If you lowered the scope a little bit and zoomed in and said, let's look over the next 5 years or 20 years, where they want to be in the world, is that oppositional to where we want to be? Or is there some middle ground that both of us could achieve?
Yeah, I think the need to divide that analysis into two things. One is, what does a China led by Xi Jinping and moving according to his preferences want, versus if you polled other Chinese? I think a Xi Jinping China is harder for the U.S. to amicably coexist with than a China where there are sort of other kinds of ways to conceive of what their renaissance would be like. So it's not just that China wants to be powerful and get respect. It's that under their current leadership, they really have basically decided that the rules that they came into the WTO on in 2001, heck with those. They want to have extensive government intervention in the economy and society, and nobody else gets to tell them boo about what they can do and what they can't do. They basically have said, forget that WTO agreement if it runs into what we want to do, because our model just works better. And we made that agreement when we were weak. And now that we're strong and we really want the party state to be able to intervene whenever we want, as much as we want, we're just that's hard for the rest of the world to accept, and for the United States. I think China's views about sovereignty, particularly the areas around mainland China, cross-strait issues, that's a really big challenge for the rest of the world to get their arms around, because this conflict between the PRC and Taiwan goes back to the 1940s, and the U.S. goal has been to keep the peace is job number one, and that means maintaining a balance of power, and so providing some direct military support and sales to Taiwanese, as well as offering the U.S. to be there in the event of a crisis, depending on the specific kinds of circumstances. And that problem has not gone away, and the balance is shifting more in Beijing's direction. And that's a really, really tough one for us, because China's goal is ultimately unification. I don't think the U.S. is, explicitly against unification, but it needs to be on a foundation of what both sides of the Taiwan Strait would agree to. And at the moment, the Taiwanese probably wouldn't say yes to just about anything that was offered to them. So that means, for the moment, maintaining hostilities from breaking out. So those are some really just giant challenges. And I think that we're also hamstrung again by our internal divisions and polarization. Some of the countries that do the best in managing China are near China. They've interacted with China a long time, and domestically, things are much more settled. In Japan, which still has a pretty strong middle class, even though their economy has grown slowly for a while. They know China is a big, giant challenge for them. They're unhappy, but they're not freaking out and switching policies every few moments. South Korea, I think, is sort of more, has a sort of more balanced approach, and Europe does as well. We're so internally divided. We kind of treat some of our foreign policy issues in the same way we treat domestic issues. We yell a lot at each other, and we don't listen to the other side, and that translates. It's in both directions. So I'm concerned, one, because China, in the direction that it wants to go under its current leadership, is a big challenge for us to find common ground with, and the things that we're doing to ourselves and the polarization doesn't put us in a position of being sort of nimble managers of this complex relationship.
Why are these other nations better equipped to handle China? Or when you say managing, is there some element of them placating China, or do they just have a more mutual understanding of each other than we do currently?
There may be a little bit of that. I do think, the U.S., we really pride ourselves on free market economy and no state intervention, typically, except for the military. We're now changing that, but that's the way it's been. And so the sort of ideological view about the free market, really, that's different than the Japanese, which is, post-World War II and before, massive state intervention to promote economic development. And we had lots of disputes with the Japanese over that. Same for South Korea. Europeans much more interventionist in their economy than we are. I also think for others, they're used to seeing, China as a big power and trying to figure out how to get along. None of them have the kind of commitments in the Taiwan issue that the U.S. does. So I think it's partly the economics, partly what our supposed roles are. But we're not doing badly. I mean, let's also recognize that there hasn't been a war. There's not a war with China is not inevitable. This is not the Middle East. It's not Ukraine. We've had 80 years of good growth and prosperity in East Asia, at least vis-a-vis China. So I just worried that things could go off the rails. And if things go off the rails with China, as bad as the conflicts that we've had in the Middle East have been, a conflict with China would be way, way frickin' worse.
Just purely because of their technological advancements, their military.
Yes. I mean, their military is super powerful. Also, it'd probably be over Taiwan. So that's 7,000 miles from us. It's right there for them. That is my colleagues at CSIS have done a ton of wargaming about cross-strait conflicts. They've done a lot. Sometimes the Chinese win. Sometimes the Americans or the Taiwanese win. 100% of the time, lots and lots of people die. And Taiwan basically gets obliterated. So that's 23 million people. That's the semiconductors that are allowing you and I to have this podcast right now, for folks to be able to drive their car, for everything. That the world goes dark if there's a major war. So the costs would be astronomical.
Is TSMC, is that kind of our predominant reason for taking our current stance in your eyes? I mean, given our reliance on technology and specifically the chips that they have developed. But I've also heard that it's a containment aspect, that using Taiwan, we can kind of control China a little more than we would otherwise be able to.
Yeah, I think there's a variety of reasons. I think the first is TSMC is really a company was created in the 90s after we originally had our commitment. So post end of World War II, the U.S. had recognized the KMT as ruling China. They lost the Civil War. They took over Taiwan from others. And for the first 20 years of the Cold War up until 1971, the U.S. recognized the KMT on Taiwan as the rightful government of all of China, and that eventually they would go back and retake mainland China. As time wore on, recognized that possibility was getting close to zero. And you had you had 1 billion people in China we didn't have a relationship with, led by Mao and the communists. So the U.S. made a rational decision, actually following in the footsteps of Europe, Japan, and others, to switch recognition from the KMT in Taiwan to the communists in China. But at the same time, maintain a commitment to an unofficial commitment to Taiwan's defense, which so when we recognized China in 1979 as the sole government of China, the U.S. Congress passed and the president signed the Taiwan Relations Act, which committed the U.S. to continue that kind of protection in some form or another. But it's under what it's called strategic ambiguity, because the U.S. hasn't said under what circumstances and which ways it would get involved. And that is, you might say that's partly driven by containment. I think it's also just driven by the idea that Taiwan has 20 plus million people who have a right to determine their future the way they want to. They weren't in 1979, but they were in the 1990s. They democratized. They've had a series of successful legislative and presidential elections. They are world-class leaders in public health and in many other areas. And so there may be some security element to it, but it's also just the fact that you've got 23 million people in a place that is extremely successful and contributes a lot to the world. TSMC sort of maybe is a cherry on top of the cake in that Taiwan has figured out how to find this critical niche in the global economy that only they know how to do really well. And so some people call that the Silicon Shield, that that no one's going to attack them because it would destroy themselves as well. I think they want to be indispensable to everyone, and the semiconductor industry helps that. But even if Taiwan didn't have TSMC, this complex dance that the U.S. is involved in with China would still be worth doing. And so there is that technology utility part, but it goes way beyond that.
I mean, the technology part is so crucial, though, at least from an outside perspective like mine. It seems that they really have, like you said, found that niche and capitalized on it and made themselves indispensable to the rest of the world in that regard.
Oh, yes. I mean, I've visited TSMC and other Taiwanese chip and tech companies, and they really are just amazingly incredible what they do, and valuable, and the world would be in a lot of hurt if things went wrong. So there is that. But I think there's these other broader issues as well for folks that have followed China and this conflict for quite some time.
How did China get here, and how did our involvement affect that? Because you look back even 50 years ago, and it seems like China was a completely different place, a completely different country on a completely different footing, especially in parity with the U.S. currently.
Oh my God, Nick, it's such a change. I'm close to being a geezer. That's what my kids say. So I've been doing China for a while, and I first went there in the late 1980s when I was in college. And that wasn't the Mao era, but not far removed from the Mao era, when China's economy was still largely agrarian. Per capita income was just a few $100s. Clothing choices were not what I would call the fanciest. A lot of plain, dark colors. Folks riding bicycles, going to work on these long red and white clunky buses, and no private cars. So things have just fundamentally changed. So China started allowing. So it's partly the planning of trying to intentionally make the economy become to grow faster, to industrialize, throwing a bunch of money at that. It's also investing heavily in infrastructure and education. It's also using the size of the China market to attract foreign investment, to make it easier for Chinese to go study abroad, to work in companies around the world. And it's just the compound interest of doing that day after day, year after year, when you're already big. So China has been able to radically reduce the amount of poverty on one side, but also become much more technologically capable on the other. there is still big areas of poverty in China and big giant challenges. Just to put that in perspective, 2/3 of young Chinese are rural Chinese, and 2/3 of rural Chinese don't finish high school. That's several hundred million people. That's a big giant problem. China's got a bunch of debt. It's got demography, but on the tech side, it is kicking ass and taking names. So from the 1980s, when there were no private cars, China allowed joint ventures from like General Motors and others in the 1990s to make not just so-so cars. Then along came some Chinese private companies like BYD and Geely, and then more investment and the move towards electric vehicles in 2013, 14. And while the Chinese said, you know what, EV is not a bad place to go. We got horrible air pollution. BMW, Mercedes, Honda, Toyota, they all dominate internal combustion engines. We can leapfrog that to something else, and we can figure out how to export. So for a whole variety of reasons, they just bet everything on EVs, and away they went. And I was at BYD just a couple months ago. It's my second visit to their headquarters, and I got to test drive an off-road SUV that had a drone on the roof. So you're sitting in this thing, you push a button, the bay opens on the roof, you push a button, the drone flies up, it starts videoing me, you push a button, it lands back in the bay while we're still driving. You push a button, it shoots video to my screen of me. I test drove another car, it jumps. I saw another car, it swims. I don't know what the drone, jumping, and swimming are going to do for cars. Maybe you know the use cases for those things, but that's a lot different than 1988 when everyone was riding around bicycles.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. My mind instantly goes towards warfare, but for civilian applications, it's just an insane proof of concept.
Yes, I mean, there's a lot of dual use alternatives for many of the things that the Chinese are developing. But wow, I mean, just the things that they're doing in AI, in robotics. I mean, I went to a factory that makes batteries 95% automated. Essentially, they could operate, turn that thing off, the lights off, and work in the dark. High-speed rail. I just was on the next gen Excella that started opening between DC and Boston just a couple weeks ago. It goes at some points in the ride 160 miles an hour. It's a little bit better seats than before, etc. It can't hold a candle to the 50,000 kilometers of high-speed rail that exist in China, where they go 350 kilometers an hour and keep it up on corners, and they're always on time. And you can have your drinks sitting there with water to the very top, and it's not going to spill. And you've got Wi-Fi that works, and it's just a way better experience. And the U.S. is just way behind in that. So there's places where the U.S. is still ahead. I think in quantum, I think in parts of the most advanced parts of AI and semiconductor chips and equipment, we're definitely still ahead, even in most areas of the biosciences. But there's many areas where the Chinese are neck and neck with us, or they're ahead. It's defied a lot of expectations, because you don't expect a country run by the Communist Party of anything to be able to promote innovation, yet they've done it, and on a massive scale.
Well, I mean, is China a purely communist country? I mean, obviously in some regard, yes, but they also have such capital investment in their private sector, even though it is so closely tied to the CCP. It's incredible the things that they are able to do, especially given the contrast, like you said, where you have a significant portion of the population that isn't graduating high school, isn't going to college.
Yeah. I think if you broke out your Karl Marx books, Lenin, other, old style socialists, and they looked at China, they'd go, "That doesn't look very socialist to me." That's quite different. But you know, uh, a lot of what they do doesn't fit the textbooks for sure. But you know, um, I do think that for them, being socialist or communist, it means a few things. First, monopoly political power by the Chinese Communist Party. That's unchallengeable, right? The second is a significant portion of the economy, the real economy, and the financial system directly controlled by the party state. And so that also means no private land. China doesn't have, there is no private land. You buy and sell land use rights in China. And thirdly, it means there is a market, but if the party wants to intervene and set the direction, they get to choose. I think fourth, it means that they do have a pretty significant commitment to some levels of what they call common prosperity, not equality, because China's level of inequality is really pretty dramatic, but eliminating poverty as much as they can, vaccinations, infrastructure across the country. I think they take that stuff super seriously. China's healthcare system is not developed as it should be, but for a country of their level of per capita income, the access to healthcare is pretty good. So I think along those elements, you could say they are communist. Maybe it's communist with a capital C as opposed to lower, and so they're different. Of course, they're still in that system, companies with lots of employees who work incredible hours under incredible pressure, with a lot of stress. So Marx would say there's exploitation, and a lot of these people feel really alienated. Unemployment for youth in China is high. People really suffered during the pandemic. A lot of people feel that they don't have a voice in the system, which they don't. And so a lot of the challenges that Marx and others identified as associated with quote unquote capitalist systems, you see in China too, all of those quote unquote contradictions. So despite being a communist country with a capital C, they have a lot of the same kinds of problems that other industrialized societies have.
Is this idea of involution, is that more uniquely tied to China?
The involution, for those listening, going to find that very confusing. So the Chinese word neizhuan means sort of like to turn in on oneself. I don't think that this is really particularly Chinese per se, but the challenge is that the way Chinese use this term now is to describe an economy that where there's structurally speaking, way too much supply of stuff that nobody can buy. And this is a problem that China has faced repeatedly. The party steps on the accelerator for investment. Factories churn out a lot of stuff. They step on the accelerator for consumption, and people don't buy as much. That's a significant gap. China makes 33% of the world's manufactured goods. They consume about 10%. That 23%, that's for the rest of the world to figure out how to absorb. And so that's a lot of excess capacity that is leading to deflation in China, companies closing or just running up huge piles of debt. And China keeps getting bigger as a share of the global economy. So the rest of the world just absorbing this stuff is difficult. And so that's trying to figure out how to manage that challenge, reduce production some, increase consumption. That is one of the core problems China faces, and I think it's partly the product of having an economic system where they can step on the accelerator and get more production easily, but not get consumption as easily. And so we have the opposite problem, of course.
Is there a plan to just counteract that by continuing to grow in the global market, or do they have a plan for the involution?
They are working on one, and they are doing a variety of things to try and absorb that supply. In the short term, they're doing things like trade-in programs. You got a dishwasher, fridge you want to upgrade to, a new EV, cell phone. Trade-in will subsidize that. I don't know about you. I only need a new phone about once every 3 years. I don't need one every few months. I'm okay with a car for 5 to 10 years. So that's a short-term fix. Maybe I ought to start consuming a lot more. And so that's a short-term fix. They are trying to figure out, how can they encourage more mergers and acquisitions in China to consolidate some of these industries. How can they allow more bankruptcies? How can they make it so that local governments just don't throw money at local companies to keep them afloat when they otherwise ought to expire? And then how can they address the housing problem in China, which is something we've not talked about yet. But in the late 1990s, China essentially took all of its urban housing stock and gave it to the owner, the residents of those homes at that time for free, and said, you now own property. Now, again, it's property use rights, not the physical property, but essentially they treat it like property. And that's led to this huge housing construction boom, and people have gradually moved up and bought more and more expensive things. I'm way too poor to be on that track. I'd totally be a member of the proletariat in China. But anyway, the Chinese just kept going. And in 2017-18, it was clear they needed to constrain their housing market because it was just growing way too fast. So they've been trying to rein it in. And that has led to a dramatic cratering of their real estate market. And prices have fallen across the country. Very difficult to sell one's property, to find someone who wants to buy it at the price you're offering at the time. And 70% of the assets in households are in their house. And so one of the reasons China has this imbalance between supply and consumption is that when you're not sure the value of 70% of your assets because it's in your house, you're not going to buy stuff. So part of fixing the involution problem is also addressing the real estate problem. So there's just a lot of these structural challenges that, China is doing awesome in many areas of tech. It's what they get all the headlines for, but they also have these other giant problems at the same time. And so that's why I call China a slow tech dragon. It's got super tech, but it has all these other things really weighing it down and slowing it down. And those two things are going to coexist, as far as I can tell, for a long time.
Well, I think that's why China is such a fascinating case study, is just the internal dichotomy that exists, where you do have this one side that is just rapidly developing, but then you also have ghost cities, or you have this aging population and not a real solution for it yet. And you're looking at it broadly thinking, where does this go in 20 years? What happens if the shackles come off, or if they can solve some of these other problems? What does that leave?
Yes. I think it's important to think about what happens if things go really badly, but also if they are successful, right? So, I'll just to put a face on what you just described. So I went to see that battery factory, 95% automated, totally amazing. Then went to go to have coffee at Starbucks, And while we're sitting there looking across the street, a high-rise apartment neighborhood, 20 super tall buildings, not a soul living in those things. That's a problem. So that just right there encapsulates a lot of the challenges. If they do figure out how to absorb that housing stock, to have a more efficient economy, a financial system that does a much better job of taking money from savers and giving it to the right types of investors, fixing healthcare and the social safety net, then wow, yes, China will be a very different kind of competitor, because they won't have the domestic problems that constrain them from doing a lot of things. They will be eating everyone's lunch, and they will be able to dictate a lot more on the global stage. Now, my sense is to get there, to the future I just described, they're going to have to address a lot of the problems in their current system. They're going to have to figure out how to give resources to people that just deserve it, not just folks that have political connections. They're going to have to improve the information space in China, because now it's dominated by censorship and the Great Firewall, and that kind of information environment makes people very nervous and less creative, less risk-taking, less well-informed. They make worse decisions. They're going to have to figure out how to have a better relationship with the West, and not turn everything into an arm wrestling match that is zero sum. So in some ways, if China solves these problems, it will be a much bigger challenge for us, and we're going to have to go from like running around in circles to really figuring things out. But it also means that they probably will have made some choices which make it possible for us to have a better relationship, because some of the things that they're doing, which upset us, also are slowing them down. So the involution problem, that translates internationally as overcapacity, and the solution for the two is the same: reduce production in China, increase consumption in China, improve our ability to produce, increase our savings. So there's some ways in which a more successful China might present new kinds of bigger challenges, but probably it'll be a China that would be less communist with a capital C, still run by the CCP, but some of the ways in which they operate might be more aligned with having a better relationship with us.
Do you see what Trump is currently trying to do with these tariffs as inadvertently helping the Chinese in that regard? Because it will bring back some of that manufacturing to the States, supposedly, and therefore kind of force their hand to make those changes?
I think the starting point of American thinking about what we need to do, I appreciate that. And I think even President Biden recognized that the U.S. needed to rebuild a lot in manufacturing. He thought it should be done through industrial policy and spending. President Trump's emphasis is on tariffs to make the cost of imports relatively higher, to make the cost of products produced here relatively cheaper. Clear, different approaches, same goal, I think. I get the logic of both. I think a lot turns on the details of execution. And I think the way the Trump administration has gone about the raising of tariffs and the negotiations with countries has probably raised concerns about the stability of the international economy and the American economy just as much as it's offered incentives for people to invest. So every time we announce that there's some new big investment project in the U.S., there's also some companies quietly, quote unquote, de-risking from the United States and moving production elsewhere. And the overall pace of the U.S. economy, I think we're slowing down a little bit. So I think broadly speaking, there is a logic to what the administration is trying to do. I think better communications, giving a greater sense of predictability and certainty would dramatically help. And predictability and certainty are not two characteristics I associate with President Trump. And so it will be hard. But if they could figure out how to cross that chasm and give people a real clear sense of where things were going, and that things would be that way for a while, it might work. I still think I'm still waiting to be convinced.
Well, if you could make one statement about our current time, I think it would be that it is very unpredictable. I don't know that I see that changing.
I agree. I kind of when I go to China, when I go anywhere, I feel like it's just an age of uncertainty, and it's everyone's just figuring out how to manage, and some are doing better than others. I do think it's a fascinating time. As much as we have so many problems, there's also really interesting, positive stories of people coming up with new solutions to problems, and I am unwilling to be a fatalist. Until my nose goes beneath the water, or I'm engulfed in flames, I still am hopeful that we can solve things. I think most people want the world to be a better place. We have lots of disagreements about how to get there. I think even there are a lot of people in China who want the world to be a better place, and not just for China. So that's why I still travel frequently there, to see the country warts and all, and why I think it's important to keep talking to folks even when you have major disagreements. So I try to be hopeful, even when things feel particularly dark.
I think that's the only way you make it through life, is you have to just try to maintain a sense of optimism. Otherwise, it's all just doom and gloom, and then what's the point?
Yeah. I mean, if we just go think from when I first went to China 37 years ago, and, the level of development that they've achieved since then, there's a lot of negatives about China. There's been a lot of political repression, a lot of problems, involution, young people the pandemic was, particularly difficult in China at the very end, when they lifted all of the constraints, and, you had a lot of people who died. But the upsides are genuine. And, I've particularly, young people in China that I meet who are very thoughtful that they are not going to be pigeonholed or forced to take on some point of view. 45 years of economic reform and interaction with the rest of the world, I think, has created really a lot of young people in China who are not going to be massaged and brainwashed in one way or the other. And I've just met a lot of these young people that are amazingly impressive, just amazingly impressive. And our country has a lot of amazing young people too. So I'm with you on trying to be optimistic.
How did the people of China balance that because it seems like obviously they have an understanding that the information they're consuming is being massaged to some extent, the idea of the Great Firewall. Are they just kind of resigned to accept that this is their current state and they have to figure out how to live under these circumstances, or is there an active desire to change that?
I think people try to manage in the real world that they have as best they possibly can, and for different people that's doing different things. For some kinds of Chinese people, that means going along to get along. I'm going to be a social ladder climber. I'm going to read the official textbooks, know the talking points, and play that game. I might know that there's a lot of BS and all that, but I want to climb the ladder and be successful. I want to work in a state-owned enterprise, government agency, even a private company that interacts a lot with the state, and I'm just going to play that game. There's plenty of people that do that. We see that, everywhere. There's a lot of people who are really alienated, and they just check out. They're like, I'm just going to go to my job, do 9 to 5. I'm not going to think about politics. It's just going to be all about culture, my personal life, my hobbies. You got a bunch of Chinese that have moved back to the countryside, to small towns. They just totally checked out. You have other people who are somewhere in the middle, where they have VPNs and can read stuff from around the world. They maybe have traveled, and they know how to deal with the world they live in, know where the red lines are, but they also are independent thinkers. And then you get the fourth category of people where it's like, forget this place. I'm out of here. You have people who send their kids abroad, themselves abroad, their money abroad, who have really just don't feel they fit in. And so I do think you see all sorts of kinds of reactions to that environment. It'd be hard to put a proportion on the various ones. Colleagues, Jen Pan and Xu Yiqing at Stanford, they do great research on public opinion in China. A lot of, looking at what social media is saying in China, but they've also reported on and done surveys of these different kinds of attitudes and responses. And so there's not a one size fits all. And so it's a challenge. I mean, if you're party leadership and, you think the party should be in control, you're generating a whole lot of different kinds of reactions. And some of those are constructive and some of them are, not.
Sticking with this vein for a second, I think one of the things that was really lost during COVID was Hong Kong. You had these protests that were going on about essentially being reabsorbed back into China, and then COVID happens and all of that is kind of lost. Have they reconciled with that, the people of Hong Kong? Or are they still, I don't know if you would say fighting where they currently are? Or...
Yeah. So Hong Kong's complex because it was, originally a part of China, and then following the Opium Wars, where the British got Hong Kong Island, and then eventually more of a small piece of mainland China, what people know as Kowloon, up to and it was a British colony. And I don't want to be advocate for colonization and stuff, but there were elements of the way Hong Kong was run at some point that were a reflection of British society, the good and the bad, the warm beer and the ability to have arguments. And particularly in the last 15 years before Hong Kong was turned over to China, where there was a move to increase the number of people in their legislature who were directly elected. And of course, Hong Kong had also for a long time had a pretty open media and a legal system based on British common law. And of course, people traveling and living there from all over the world, so very different from the PRC. I think originally China had promised for the first 50 years of Hong Kong's return that it'd be one country, two systems. It'd be politically under the PRC, but maintain its economic and social structures and with very little intervention from Beijing. Hong Kongers took them up on that pledge and said, we are going to try and actually make this place 100% directly elected. And that's what you guys said. You guys said that we could do that, and moved in that direction. And Beijing was like, no, actually, you're supposed to be, that's not really what we meant. What you're calling direct elections and governance, that sounds a lot like independence to us. And we don't, and negation of the Communist Party, and we don't want that. So game over. So that's why we got the national security law in 2020 and a crackdown since. I would say that Hong Kong's gone through stages since then. Was there in 2023 to look at all of this, and the wounds, the scars had not healed. There was still a bunch of animosity locally and big fissures. On the one hand, conservatives, people that have sort of a more traditional view of life and the role of authority, and view and are strongly patriotic and nationalistic in the way that the CCP would want. They're like, we're going in the right direction. We have no more protests. Things are calm. Liberals still really angry, upset, and forlorn, figuring out like how could they continue to get along. I just went a few months ago, and things had changed, much calmer. The conservatives, like, we won. This is exactly the city that we want it to be. It's very peaceful. There's no protests. Also, the stock market is up. So, money in people's pockets. The liberals, they're either gone or the ones that are still there have basically stuffed it. We're just going to deal. We're not going to fight this system anymore. Day to day, they'll figure out how in their little pocket of their life to maintain peace. There's still the open internet. There's still not the same kind of restrictions that you face in mainland China, but there's no fight in the Borg any longer. That's impossible. So it's really calmed down. It was for conservatives, and they're thrilled. For liberals, I just happen to be a liberal in small L. They feel like it's not the place that they want it to be, and they're just coping.
Which is understandable. I mean, if you go from where you were in Hong Kong to where you are currently, that's kind of a big pill to swallow.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's really changed a ton, and I mean, it's still such an interesting, creative place. It's still different than Beijing and other mainland cities, but the evolution of Hong Kong, because people just sort of have different conceptions of like, what's the ideal city? How do I imagine this place? And those really conflict with each other. And one side has got the political muscle, and they have imposed their vision on the city. And for others, it's too bad for them. And it's the same for China as a whole. This is really, the CCP is really defining what they mean by the China dream. And for those who are unhappy with that definition, whose identity isn't tied up in that vision, China is an uncomfortable place. But at least they have a clear idea. At least the leaders say, here is what that vision is, and you can like it or not. In the U.S., there's like 75 different visions, and we're all still arm wrestling and fighting with each other, and no common idea of what it is. Neither one is really ideal environment to be in, unless. But there's something about the Chinese side, sort of, you really know who's in control and what they're trying to do.
Yeah, like you said, over here, it almost changes day to day, let alone every 4 years.
It certainly does. Wow.
Well, Scott, thank you for taking the time to come on and chat with me.
It's been great, Nick. I really appreciate the conversation. We talked about some things which I'm used to talking about with regard to China, some other things which I think a lot about, but don't say a lot because I'm not sure what they are. And I hope I didn't offend anybody who's listening. I always welcome constructive feedback, and really appreciate the time with you.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time. Do you want to plug all of your stuff where people can find CSIS, your podcast?
Sure. If anyone wants to follow up more for the work that I do on China, you can go to csis.org or just Google me. I'm not plugging Alphabet, but you could Google me. And then also I have a podcast called China Field Notes. It comes out twice a month, where we feature voices from on the ground in China, both Chinese citizens as well as foreigners who travel or live in China. In Washington, there's plenty of podcasts and information about what Americans think about China, from looking from 7,000 miles away. And we try to give people an up-close perspective through China Field Notes.